This is the Norris Group's Real Estate Investor Radio Show, the award-winning show dedicated to thought leaders shaping the real estate industry and local experts revealing their insider tips to succeed in an ever-changing real estate market. Hosted by author, investor, and hard money lender, Bruce Norris.
Hi, thanks for joining us. My name is Bruce Norris, and today our special guest is Craig Evans. Craig is the owner of Douglas Brooke Homes. He's a licensed building contractor in the state of Florida with nearly 30 years of construction experience, including residential, commercial, municipal. Third-generation builder, he has worked frontline activities through management as a subcontractor, laborer, foreman, superintendent, project manager, mid-level manager, and executive manager, truly learning the business from the ground up. Craig has successfully owned multiple companies and quality brands by focusing on adding value to every facet of the project and not letting details go unnoticed. He believes in teamwork and has put together a quality team in-house, as well as some of the most trusted trade partners in the industry to build Douglas Brooke Homes. And Craig, we're very happy you came along and met with the Norris Group and have built homes for our investors for the last year and a half or so.
Well, first of all, that was a mouthful that you said, Bruce. So
yeah, I didn't know you had such an involved bio. I'm only kidding. As you can tell, we kind of know each other, and that's fun.
Right?
You know what's kind of good is, honestly, it's really good to face some hard times with people, because until that happens, you don't really know who you have.
That's right.
And yeah, and I'll go back to the hurricane. When it hit, we were in the middle of a bunch of projects, and one day, I mean, maybe the day after the hurricane hit, you just told me, he says, Bruce, I've got to unplug. And what you did is you took your boat 20 times a day and helped people get off islands they were stuck at.
Yep.
And I asked for a list of stuff that you could give to people. And so we loaded up a van and took it there. And so we both found out more about each other on that day than we could have any other way.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, and that's pretty cool, because I think that's one of the most important things in business is trust. You know, if you get to a point where you go, okay, I'm not concerned about intent. You know, I know the intent's good.
Right.
And when you get to there, I mean, everything's workable.
That's right. Well, and I think, Bruce, even with that, a lot of it comes back to how you and I met. I mean, let's face it, when you and I met, you were coming out of a situation that wasn't great for the Norris Group.
No, it was terrible. And that was funny, because you were being mentioned to me and I was being mentioned to you. Right. So as I was, negotiating and giving checks to people that had to take a discount, they were going, why don't you just work with Craig Evans? He pays all his bills for a long time. And I think you were hearing from the subcontractors, why don't you go talk to Bruce? Because he's got to solve something.
Well, Bruce, and you and I've talked a lot about that day, because that is what has started our last, 3.5, 4 years of friendship. And I truly look at it in that way. I value you more as a friend than anything business wise.
Thank you.
But the interesting thing was, and you can imagine it as a general contractor and also, a subcontractor with some of our other companies, we hear a lot of times people like, oh, you should work for this person or you should build for this person. And in that, there's a lot of times we hear the good things, but what's the truth, and obviously part of it is like, hey, we're going into this situation. Why is someone leaving a builder? And in that same process, what is that going to mean for me? How is that potentially going to affect my company? And I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I think the thing that hit me the most that I didn't learn until the day you and I were sitting in that lobby, just starting to talk and not even so much about business, but just who we were and what our families are and what they mean, was when it really hit me why you were there. And that was, to work through some, like, trying to talk people off the cliff of what was going on. But more importantly, you were there to write checks for people that you didn't have to write checks for. They weren't your projects. You were writing checks because of your reputation.
Right. Absolutely.
And that was, to me, also the thing where I just kind of struck me as like, okay, we'll see if we do business down the road. But more importantly, I want to know who this man is. Who is this man as a person?
Thank you.
So I have enjoyed working with you and the Norris Group and the investors that you bring to the table, all of that process. But it's because of who you are, because like you said, you don't know who people are until you go through a tough time. And even in that was one thing to see how you handle it then. But let's face it, Bruce, neither one of us knew COVID was coming.
No.
One of us knew the supply chain issues were coming. The labor issues were coming. That Hurricane Ian, I mean, let's face it, I called you the morning of the hurricane and said, hey, you call me when it's done, or I'll call you because you're going to need help, because that storm was supposed to hit you and not us.
That's right. And when you called me, I remember you were charting the wind speed, and I think you mentioned 190. It wasn't sustained, but it had hit it. It's like, oh.
Yeah, we got gusts. Actually, we got confirmed gusts from the fire station just about a mile and a half from us. They had gusts upwards of 206 miles an hour.
Wow. It's a good thing you were in a home you built, huh?
That's right.
Wow.
That's it.
Well, that is one thing that's special about Florida construction, especially the newer stuff. It's got a code it's different. And when I first came to Florida after hurricane was 92, and I was in Miami where my buddy lived, and I was driving, and I was there a month later, so I was driving, but there were piles of trash lining every street. The cleanup was not close to being done, but I was passing by neighborhoods that were still okay, and then I found out later, oh, that's block homes. Then I'd go to stick-built homes, and they were not okay, and sometimes really badly done. And then I'd go past a mobile home park, and it wasn't existing. And so, kind of note to self, make sure you build concrete houses,
Well, and even with that, one of my friends that we worked with him on his house, he is a builder, but we did a lot of the stuff for him, the shell and things like that. He is literally just over the bridge from Fort Myers Beach. His main floor took water, but everything below him was completely underwater. All of his cars, all of his garage, everything. There were other houses that were literally in his neighborhood that were built 15, 18 years earlier, before some of the, because code started changing after Andrew,
right,
and then again after Charlie. There were several houses that were built pre-Charlie that had not been affected by that change in our zone because of wind zone changes, and they were literally completely off of their substructure. My friend's house that he had been in his house for 6 months and like 2 days when Ian hit. And I mean, he had 21 feet of water come into his house, onto his property.
Right.
We built at an elevation that he only had, I think, 6 or 8 inches of water in his main living level, but everything else below that was completely underwater. Once waters receded and that whole wall of water was gone, to realize there was zero structural damage to his home that was a proud day, to see that stuff you build can withstand 21 feet of water.
Yeah. Oh,
that was comforting to know that, okay, when we build it, we're building it right.
Yeah. No, it's a good thing they changed the elevation, for most of the other areas that were higher. We look kind of like we're on a mountaintop, and then when you have one of those hurricanes, you go, oh, I'm really glad.
That's right.
I'm really glad we're higher than that guy next door. I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about some of the cycles, because we're definitely in a new cycle. But I just want to touch briefly, because you've been around a while, 2006 and 7. I really want to touch on what was the mood of the buyer like at that point, because that was a crazy period. And was that driven, do you think, by investor money at that point, or was that still owner occupant buying all that stuff at the top of the price level?
It was both. I mean, there was massive in this Southwest Florida market. There was massive amounts of investor money that was coming in, but it's not the investors that we deal with now. The investors that were coming in,
it was speculators.
That's it. Because of the lending market that was going on, you had people that couldn't afford their main house, their primary residence, and they were getting loans for 10 rentals.
Right.
Because they could breathe on a mirror and fog it up. They were allowed to get a loan. But unfortunately, you had a lot of primary residents being bought then under the same guise of that structure, that they were buying stuff they shouldn't have been.
Correct. And a price they probably shouldn't have either.
That's it. So the 08 fall of that came because of the lending that was there. But
right.
Yeah, the cycle of it, I would say it was probably close to 60-40. There was a lot of investor money there, but again, it's a whole different cycle than what we're seeing now, because the cycle of money that's coming through now buying stuff is there's a lot of primary residents at here. A lot of primary residents, and Bruce, you and I've talked about this for the last year and a half. The amount of people moving into Southwest Florida is unfathomable right now.
Yeah.
So that's a huge draw on housing that is a requirement.
After 0607, we hit 0809, and obviously the market crashed. And one thing that Florida had at that time was it was a very long foreclosure process. So when California hit 08 and 09, it was the worst of the foreclosure time. You guys had that until 2014.
That's correct.
It went on, and it was actually 4-year duration for a foreclosure. So what was it like to be a builder during that cycle, when it was all, you could buy a 2-year-old house below replacement cost by far?
Well, that's the interesting thing. That's interesting that you're pulling or mentioning that, because again, at that time there were no new homes being built.
No.
I mean, we went to, permits being pulled were in the hundreds and maybe 1,000 for the entire county of Lee County. Simply because, as you said, you could buy homes for 30, 40, 50% below replacement.
Exactly.
So it was an interesting time, which then, and I'm sure, I'm not trying to jump ahead of you, but I'm sure you're going to go to, that's what created that next cycle and created a lot of the build, because with no new homes being built, people were grabbing up that demand of inventory that was below replacement costs. Well, then by 2018 and 19, people were moving in saying, okay, I want to find the deal. I want that 5-year-old to 10-year-old inventory. There was nothing, because nothing had been built.
Well, what I do also want to kind of relate to, so at 2020, I was in both markets, but California felt like it was kind of done as far as excessive price increases. We were not escalating. As a matter of fact, a certain percentage was already negative, like 25% of the inventory year over year was showing a little bit of a negative hit. And then the coronavirus hit.
Right.
And on all of a sudden, it felt like 06, 07 in velocity of price. Right.
Right.
I mean, it just went nuts. So, you're building, and if you're starting a home and getting done with it a year later, the price that you could have gotten would change dramatically in that 12 months.
Oh, absolutely. I go back to in 2019, let's call it, we were selling our 1,400 square foot model for $199,000. Today, that house, I want to say, is like 305.
Yeah. 50% increase. Yep.
That's right.
Now, so 06, 07 was explosive years, 2020 to 2022 explosive years. What do you see as the outcome of 20 and 22 now with 2023 going forward? Compare that to what you saw in 08, 09. Do you see any correlation there, or do you think this is going to be a completely different outcome?
I think we're apples and oranges in the type of cycles that we're in now compared to what was going on then. Again, as you were talking about, we had such a long foreclosure period that was inventory that people were looking at because they were buying so far below replacement costs. You come to now, we're not in a foreclosure period. We're in a period to where we're still short on supply. Now, is the purchase rate as fast as what it was? No, but compared to any normal market, we're in a very healthy market of how the timing of stuff is moving. But no, we're apples and oranges compared to what the market is now and the cycle of real estate we're in now compared to what it was in the 07 or the 08 and 09 time period.
Yeah, and why that's important is that when your inventory starts getting dominated by lender-owned properties, your prices free fall because the lenders have to get rid of those things. But if that doesn't occur, so what's occurring this time is very different. So now we're in 2023. You had a chance to refi your home for 18 months at 4 and then 3 and then something that started with a 2.
That's right.
Okay, so what's going to motivate you to sell that inventory and get something that now is a 6 or a 7? The chances are you're going to say, I'm good. And the reason that's important to think of is that I don't really know, and you probably do, the mix of new homes versus existing home sales as a percentage historically. That would be interesting to know, because what's not on the table now is tons of existing homes are not going to come up for sale. So you're going to have new homes build X amount. Let's say it's 20% of the inventory, but the other 80% of the inventory that's normal isn't showing up. Maybe 25% that'll show up. And it'll show up only because of a situation. I lost my job, so I am now transferring to somewhere else and I've got to sell. But even then, see, that's what's so protective about this cycle is you could make a decision and say, well, rents have gone up so much. I bought that 1,400 square foot house for 200 grand, but I got an interest rate on it at 3 and it now rents for $1,800. I'll just keep it. So we really have never faced this market. That's what's amazing.
And that is exactly what's interesting, because obviously 3 months ago, interest rates were really starting to hit a peak rate. And I think everything, even here for about maybe a 3-4 week period tops, started to freeze a little bit. Then people started to get some rate normalcy, at least in this market, and realize that, hey, that, as you said, that those rates starting with a 2, those were no longer.
No.
But, to take it to that, I mean, we signed 2 contracts this Saturday. One of them had a rate of 6.94, I believe it was, on a fixed 30. Again, Bruce, I mean, you remember if you go back to 07, 06, when things were kicking, what was those rates at that time?
Well, they were adjustable teasers. And so it didn't really matter. They were 1% for about 90 days.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, yeah.
So I think we've actually seen a lot of the lending down here. We're actually starting to see that number starting to drop a little bit over the last 35 to 40 days. Not dramatic, but I mean, we've seen quarter point drops on the retail market of what the rates are going for. So that's helping tremendously. And even in for my personal portfolio, the rates that we're paying on that has come back down. And, I can get stuff, at pretty decent rates for fixed 30 now, where even 45 days ago wasn't getting those types of rates. So it's an interesting process to see what those cycles were then compared to what they are now. And I think there's so many facets that are driving why it's different now compared to what it was for 09 to 2014.
We just checked the interest rates. I think there was a negative inflation report this week, and I think the rates went to 7.
Yep. Well,
the mortgage rate anyway, something like that.
Yep. So I've got 2 that I'm putting into my portfolio now that are actually some of my builds because I, just like we do for you, I build some for me as well. So in that, I've got 2 going in, and I'm sub 7 on a fixed 30 for for a rental product.
No, non-owner occupied. Wow. Okay. That's a good
Correct.
number.
Yep.
Bruce, we had a term for 6.9. It's called hard money.
Yeah, that's funny. We had a 6.9 rate for a long-term loan, actually. Yeah, that's how we did. That's how we encourage people to do rental loans. Is we had
Yep.
a affordable product that was out for years. That's funny you mentioned that, Joey. Yeah, now the market's changed. You know what's interesting about our industry, Craig, is that the volume of sales. Okay, first we'll talk about unemployment. So unemployment numbers are really, really low still, historically very, very low. But the volume of sales, I'll use California, is down by about 50%. So you went from 450,000 sales to below 250,000 sales, and your price has gone down maybe 100 grand. So the revenue that entire industry is generating is down by 50%. They're still employed, but getting paid half of what they were.
Right.
And the same thing true with lending. So the bulk of the business was refis for a long time. And now it's probably zero.
Right.
But they're still employed. They're just not making anything. So that's one of the things, when we write this new report that are coming up, is really analyzing that and say, okay, well, you can say unemployment is still fine, but the revenue for the entire industry was here and now it's here.
Right.
And that takes its toll, so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Now, builders, let's talk about like a track builder. What's their mood right now? If you said like a Lennar or one of those guys who had, they certainly had their way for quite a long time. They didn't even give you a price when they started constructing a home. It's just like, it's going to be what it is when we get done with it. You want to put your name on it, that's great. But things changed, and now I wonder how bad their cancellations are. And I guess the bottom line is, do you see any chance that there'll be auctions of unsold tracts of homes
In our market?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No. It's an interesting thing, and I think part of it, Bruce, I'll even go back to your last point where we were talking about the revenue and what was, the revenue that was coming out of this industry. It has been very interesting to see in the last 45 days the amount of lenders from outside markets calling us directly, wanting to be preferred lenders for Douglas Brooke Homes.
Okay.
Because they understand I can't get loans in Texas right now because, Austin is taking a beating. But I can do loans in South Florida because there's tons of loans. There's a ton of products still being sold. So it's been interesting to see even that shift of how the marketplace nationally is looking to, just as you said, how do we replace some of the revenue that's being generated that we're losing out of our market share because of what's happening in certain places in the country that's not happening here. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't ever want to say that we're bulletproof, but right now we're Southwest Florida is in a really good position. But to go back to or go ahead, I'm sorry, were you going to jump in and say something?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that is really protective of the market for Florida is who's coming here. So you have migration from states that have a median price at double the level. And so you could, just a scenario, think about somebody having a $2 million condo in Manhattan that has $1 million loan on it. If they decide to move to Southwest Florida, the $1 million home is going to be a whole lot nicer than their $2 million condo, and then they don't owe anything.
That's right.
Well, you see, you can't say that in California. Where are you going to migrate from to have a more expensive house sold? You'd have to go from Canada to California, basically, or something like that. There's very few choices. So Florida is really the epicenter now of migration and immigration for the whole country, and money. By far, the migration of net worth is staggering. So Florida's number one, and it's more than 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7 combined.
Yep.
So that's what's going on. Is there's a lot of money showing up And Florida's median price is still on par with the nation.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not like we're overpriced as far as the rest of the country. We're not.
Right. Nope.
So
Yeah,
it's you talk about that insulation, Bruce, but one of the things that has affected. Remember when we interviewed Derek Harms in San Diego, and he talked about immigration affecting some of the labor issues down there, and it was hard to get crews and all those kinds of things. One of the unspoken, insulations that Florida's getting to with, along with that wealth, along with that migration, the immigration is bringing labor too, labor that is still able to, complete all these jobs.
Yeah, obviously, immigration and what we do is a huge role and plays a huge role in the amount of trade partners that we're able to utilize for our jobs. Since Ian. It is, I think a lot of times people think, oh, there's because of the immigration, we've got plenty of labor. I mean, there is still the battle of labor. You've got to be very quick on how you pay. You got to maximize things, and especially since Ian has hit with certain of the remodel projects that are going on in certain areas. You go to Sanibel Island. We're around, let's say for per board on drywall, our raw cost of material and labor to get that done is running about $75 to $80 a board, depending on the week, to hang tape and finish a board of drywall. You go to across the bridge to Sanibel Island, and you're $213 to $230 a board.
Wow.
So obviously, there are certain aspects now that is the fight to make sure that the labor pools and the resources that we utilize now to build, we've got to be very, very time sensitive in making sure that we pay on time, that we keep them busy enough, and that we run our jobs efficiently so that they don't get frustrated, that they make sure they get paid, because obviously they can go right across the bridge and make 4 to 5 times as much. It's
maybe work independently too.
That's correct. That's it. So while there are great things about what is, you never want to say that a storm is great, because there's still a lot of things that mentally I still see from all the stuff that we did. But at the same time, from a business process, there's a lot of things where Hurricane Ian has been good for the construction industry and the real estate industry down here. But that doesn't mean that we've got unlimited amounts of labor, because again, Bruce, I know you and I talked about this at the I Survive Real Estate event last year, or right after the storm, was the amount of housing that was taken out of the marketplace due to Ian. Well, it's coming out. There's only about 3 to 4% of the population that was here is actually choosing to leave.
Right. So
you've got about 23% of the single family residences were damaged to one degree or another. Only 3 to 4% of that population is saying, I'm out. Let me check out of this. Well, okay, so there's still a 17-point spread there of people that are staying that don't have a place to live.
Right. They have to migrate while their home is either being demolished and rebuilt, or find a contractor to fix it. You're right.
That's right. So it's a very interesting dynamic now, and the labor pool definitely plays into it, because when you've got that many people that stayed, and Bruce, we were talking about it that night, that it'll be interesting to look 6 months down the road and see how many of these people actually stayed. Well, we're seeing, hey, the majority of them are choosing to stay and fight through, whatever headaches they've got to fight through right now, because of the value of what we do and how, the lifestyle that we live here. But the challenge that brings is, okay, we're still short this amount of housing. Where are we going to put new people that come in to help us build? So those bring about sets of challenges.
That's going to do it for this week's episode. Please join us again next week for the Norris Group Real Estate Radio Show and Podcast, where, again, our guest will be Craig Evans, CEO and founder of Douglas Brooke Homes.
For more information on hard money loans and upcoming events with the Norris Group, check out thenorrisgroup.com. For information on passive investing with trust deeds, visit tngtrustdeeds.com.
The Norris Group originates and services loans in California and Florida under California DRE License 012-19911, Florida Mortgage Lender License 1577, and NMLS License 1623669. For more information on hard money lending, go to thenorrisgroup.com and click the Hard Money tab.